Hi there. I've been trying this like 20 times so far, and I'm trying to have this really nice practiced introduction to this podcast, but I'm just not there yet. So I'm going to be real and just lay it out there for you guys. This is the Woolens and Nosh podcast. My name is Michelle, and you can find me on Instagram as Woolens and Nosh or on Ravelry as Michelle the Maker, and I spell Michelle with one L. So this podcast is about baking and knitting, and I dye yarn for my business, Woolens and Nosh, and I will give information about that at the end of the podcast with shop updates. I feel like that's just as good as it's going to get today. In this episode, we are going to be baking again. I have some new toys to play with, some cookie stamps. At Christmas time, I was coveting those cookie stamps in the catalogs. Did you see them? There's a couple different brands that make them, but I thought they were gorgeous, and I wanted to make those so badly, and when I saw how much they were, I said, oh, maybe I'll wait till after Christmas and see if I can snag them on sale, and I did. So I'm going to try out those cookie stamps with some brown sugar and cardamom cookies. I haven't actually recorded that part of the podcast yet, so either I'm going to fill them with a honey and cinnamon buttercream, or I'm going to glaze them with a lemon glaze. Stay tuned. Anyway, additionally, we will have some works in progress with my knitting, finished objects, what I'm reading and watching, and then also some combination shop news and dream knitting. Okay, so let's start off in the kitchen and get to making some cookies. After assessing what I actually had in my pantry, I decided to go with brown sugar and cardamom cookies with a grapefruit glaze, which sounds crazy, but it was really good. I am not sponsored by Nordic Wear. They did not give me these stamps. I just found them on sale and decided I'd like to try them. They come with 3 shapes, a diamond, a star, and a round, and a lot of the cookie stamps have an all-over patterning that you would then, like you would stamp your dough and then use another cutter to cut a circle or other shape. But these are kind of bound on the edges, which I thought was fun. You can make really fun sandwich cookies or not sandwich them. You could go either way. And when I Googled recipes, I was intrigued by the cardamom and brown sugar flavor profile. I hadn't tried that before, so that's why we're doing it today. I was curious. My ground cardamom in my pantry was no good anymore. It had been there for a while, and it's one of those spices that really lose its flavor quickly over time. But I did have some pods in my pantry, cardamom pods, and I decided to use my husband's coffee mill to grind up some seeds. I did a little research, and it said that about 6 pods should yield you 1 teaspoon of ground cardamom. I found I needed more like 9 pods to get 3/4 of a teaspoon of cardamom. So your mileage may vary. This is actually cardamom is related to the ginger family. Did you know that? I didn't know that. So that's the flavor profile of cardamom. It's got a unique flavor, but you can definitely substitute ginger if you don't have it. So now I'm going to whisk it into my flour. In the recipe, you'll see I've listed by cups measurement as well as by weight. I find that weighing my ingredients makes me much more accurate, and so that I get consistent results each time I make something, and it makes it much easier to scale. It's a lot easier for me, in my mind, to be able to make 2.5 of something if I start with grams rather than ounces. So this recipe only has 4 ingredients: butter and dark brown sugar and flour and cardamom. You want to look for a recipe when making a stamped or shaped cookie that's going to have a higher flour ratio than sugar. Sugar makes our cookies spread, and sometimes you really want that, but sometimes you don't. So things like shortbreads and spritz cookies, those are going to be really great for this type of recipe or technique. You don't have to get your butter and sugar combination to the light and fluffy stage. Again, that's going to add air into your dough, and when it bakes, that air is going to cause it to spread. In a cake, you want light and fluffy, so as much air as you can get for leavening into your batter or dough is good, but we're making more of a dense cookie, so you don't have to go quite so far. And then I'm adding half of the flour and mixing that, and then adding the other half just until it starts to come together. I don't see any more white flour, but it's not a super solid dough yet. It's easily squished into a shape, but by leaving, without going quite so far and getting it into one big ball of dough, it helps keep the cookie tender. Now I tried several different ways of shaping these cookies with the cookie stamps. And so this recipe did not say it needed to be chilled before using stamps. So I figured I shouldn't have to do that. If it was a sticky dough, then I would have chilled it definitely for probably about 2 hours before trying to stamp it. But I found at first it was sticking to the counter, and I wanted to stick to the stamp, so you really have to be sure to flour them well. I ended up using my bench scraper. It ends up being the best tool to help me make these cookies in a fun way rather than fighting with the dough all the time. So I'm going to show you the method that becomes my favorite here. I flour my stamp and squish my dough. Use the bench scraper to scrape it up off the counter. And then I think the secret to making these look good is having the edges nice and clean on the release. You don't want to have any dough hanging over. So I just use my bench scraper to scrape along the edges of the shape and then smooth out so it's nice and even, and then tap it out. And that, I found, gave me the best results. And I just brush off the excess dough, or excuse me, flour, and then set it on the pan. They don't spread much at all, so you're able to get them about an inch or so near each other, and they won't bake together. Again, just a quick lift up off the counter, scrape the edges. It worked really well for the star to get the dough all the way into those little points, and then tap it out. It went so much quicker and easier that way than trying to fight with it so much without the bench scraper. If you don't have a bench scraper, use a spatula. That would work well. Yeah, those are my 2 options. Anyway, I guess the only other thing I would say before they go in the oven is that you want to make sure to mix the dough as well as possible. These cookies, if you get a pocket of sugar or a pocket of butter that didn't get incorporated well, that's when your cookies are going to spread and you're not going to see the design as clearly as you might. While they're cooking in the oven, I made my glaze. I used 3/4 cup of confectioner's sugar, and I didn't measure it, but I squeezed my grapefruit in there, probably about a tablespoon or 2, to get the consistency of glue, or slightly thinner than glue, like Elmer's glue. So here are my cookies. Look, I've got one that spread a little more than I wanted it to, so I'm going to test that one. And you can see here, look at that flaky, crispity, melt in your mouth goodness. So, you know, baker's privilege. Give that one a try. And it was really delightful. Very light. The cardamom didn't overpower. In fact, you could probably use a little more if you wanted. And I thought it would go really well with that grapefruit citrus flavor of the glaze. And now I've just got my pastry brush and I'm going to smear it, paint it onto the cookies. I did let these cool in the pan for maybe 5 minutes or so. So they're still warm, but almost cool. And I found that would probably be the perfect way to do this. The glaze settles into the crevices and it doesn't melt off as quickly. It will smooth out and look beautiful, but most of it will stay on the cookie rather than falling on the parchment below, and give you more flavor of that citrus on top of the cookie. And here's just another view of that consistency that you're looking for. Not too thick, not too thin. And you can see here I took these cookies out of the oven and put them right on the cooling rack before I started brushing on the glaze. And it really does have a different look. It's still a very pretty look, but because that heat melts it and most of it falls off, it has more of a shine or lacquer look to it rather than a glazed look. I mean, it's still glazed, but you don't really see the white anymore once they dry. They become a clear, glossy, mirrored finish rather than what a glaze would look like on a, if it were thicker. This batch made about between 2 and 3 dozen. I forgot to count before we started eating, but 2.5 dozen probably. Once I got my technique down, they went very quickly. So I wouldn't think they would take any longer than normal sugar cookies would. The texture is light and bright, and I really enjoyed that cardamom and citrus flavor together. I think they're just so pretty on the plate. Thanks for joining me today in the kitchen, and now back to the knitting.
Hey! So before I get into the knitting, I just wanted to give you a quick introduction about who I am and why I'm chatting you up about baking and knitting. So we live in a small town in Vermont, about 10 miles north of Norwich, which is where King Arthur Flour is, if you're familiar with that. And my background in baking includes, at one point I had a small cottage law bakery out of my kitchen in North Carolina, where I did like wedding cakes and birthday cakes and all kinds of decorated cakes. And then the majority of my business was decorated sugar cookies. I did those for several years and got quite obsessed about it. And then we moved to Vermont, and I kind of let that business dissolve. My kitchen was no longer compatible with a cottage law bakery out of my home. So I let that go, but I did continue baking. I did 2 seasons of the Food Network Baked in Vermont show. Long story, which maybe one day I'll tell you, but I happened to know the hostess of that show, and when they were starting the pilot, she needed to have somebody, a baker, in the back kitchen doing all of the prep work and swap outs and beauties, and basically if it wasn't happening on the camera, I was doing it in the back. She needed somebody for that, and she called up and said, "Hey, can you do that?" And I was like, "Yes, I can." So that aired for 2 seasons, and it was such a great run. I learned so much, and had a really good time baking some really beautiful things. And then when that finished, last year, in order to fund my wool dyeing business, I just decided to take a baking job at a local sleepaway camp, a family camp, kind of through word of mouth. The new head chef there needed a baker, and I was like, well, I can bake, I think. which is, it's always a little bit different. Doing the decorated cookies and the cakes is very different than TV baking, and TV baking is very different than baking for 120 people 3 meals a day, so that's a lot of different experience. So I feel good about coming and talking with you about baking. My favorite are heritage recipes, but I also get into the pretty fussy stuff too. So maybe we'll kind of explore some things together. I'm not really going to look to teach a whole lot. There are so many people who do such a great job of instructing on the be it YouTube or blogs or however, all kinds of places to find instructional baking. But I thought we're just gonna, we knit together, we talk about things together on our podcasts. I thought maybe we would bake together, and I can just review recipes or tell you about different stuff, like the cookie stamps. So yeah, that's my baking background. And then my knitting, I've been knitting for about 6 years, not very long. I started off watching YouTube. Well, hold on. Let me be honest. When I was pregnant with my son, again, I was 20-something years old at that time. Did I tell you that already? I have a 24-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter. And I was 21 when my son was born. And while I was pregnant, I was on bed rest for preeclampsia. And my mom came down and we decided to crochet. Since I was stuck in bed, I was going to rip fabric and make yarn and knit a crochet a fabric rug. And I was kind of crazy, sitting in bed all the time. And I'm finding mistakes and ripping it out and crying and hating it. And then I finally finished, and I had it for a while, but it was not very comfortable to walk on. So I ended up getting rid of it eventually. But since then, I didn't really try. Fast forward to about 6 years ago, I saw somebody arm knitting on YouTube, with the arms. Well, my arms were quite chunky. I couldn't seem to get a whole lot onto my wrists. So I decided that I was going to knit on Christmas wrapping paper tubes. I figured that was probably the size of the wrist of the girl I was watching. So I could do that. And eventually I felt a little braver to work myself down to regular sized needles, and found my local yarn shop and kind of took off. I knit almost every day. I knit all the time, which led to my love of wool. And I remember the first time I went in the local yarn shop. I don't think I'd ever worked with wool up until that point. And I remember the first time I got there, these ladies were like smelling their yarn. Oh, that smells so good. And I would smell it and I'm like, oh, that stinks, kind of. Really? That's enjoyable to you? But since then, I've acquired that scent, and I really do enjoy it. So yeah, I'm still learning about knitting, but it's kind of replaced my baking creativity outlet. So I dive in, and I'm not afraid to try anything. There are things that I don't really enjoy as much as other things, but I'm almost up for anything to try out. It's all very interesting and fun to me. So anyway, and now I dye yarn because I just can't get enough of it. And I mostly do self-striping yarns, but I'm starting to branch out into gradient sets and possibly some speckle sorts of things, and we'll talk about that later. But let's go ahead and get into the knitting, okay? That was a lot about me. It's clearly not everything, but it kind of gives you a background about the subject matter of this podcast. All right, so I'm just gonna check the notes here. Works in progress. I continue to make lots of progress on my scrappy granny stripe blanket. Let's see. I've got a marker here. So last time I was here, and so I think I've gotten about 8 or 9 inches on it in the last 2 weeks. Still love it. Still can't get enough of it. So I put this little lemon stitch marker from Super Miniatures. I was able to get that at the beginning of January. It's so precious. I love lemon drops. And I recently gave up candy. So I was happy to get that little guy. But anyway, I put that on as soon as I got it. So that's how much I've done in a month. Maybe about a foot. So at that rate, I might be, who knows when I'll be done, but if I continued at that rate, I could have it by the end of summer, right? For sure. Anyway, Molly, who you might have seen from the first episode, my daughter, a friend came over. I was under this blanket. I had on a wool and I was making this blanket, and so Molly was like, yeah, my mom's in there. She's making a blanket while she's under a blanket, and she thought she was real clever, but it's true. My yarn ball, or magic knot ball, has significantly decreased. I haven't weighed it yet to see how much I've used, but probably almost half of it, maybe? I don't know. Not quite half. Maybe a third of it. So that's coming along. There's really not a whole lot to say about it except that I love it, and it's so zen-like, and it's kind of almost too big now to work on out in public. So I mostly just, at the end of the day, I start the day by trying to knit through each segment of yarn in there before the knot is somewhere between 14 and 20 ounces of, no, grams. Grams of yarn. So I try to knit through one color in the morning when I wake up with my tea, and I try to knit another color before I go to bed at night, minimally, but often I'll get 2 or 3 done in a day in the middle somewhere. All right, the next thing I've got is my bubble sweater from Molly. I finished the body. I'm working on the ribbing. So yeah, it was just a lot of stockinette since last week, and I did bind off at one point where I made this little bunny based on one of my old cookie decorations out of a shrinky dink. Anyway, is that what they're called? They're called shrinky dinks, right? Yeah. Anyway, this is where it was. I had started the ribbing here, and so I would have bound off already, and my daughter was like, oh, I wanted it a little bit longer. So I ripped out the ribbing and did a couple more inches of stockinette, and now I'm about an inch or so into the ribbing at the end. So yeah, I think it's going to be great. Confession, because it's the pattern is the same stitch counts for all sizes until you're finished with the yoke. And then after that, if you wanted it to be a larger size, then you might do another round of increases down here before you separate it for the arms. But everything up through here is the same for all the sizes. And I thought, I wonder if I could wear that. guess what? I can. I tried it on. So if she doesn't like it, like she tried it on, well, first of all, she likes how it looks. She's very excited about wearing it. But when I tried it on her, she's like, ooh, it's kind of scratchy. Now, it might not be, it's not merino, but it's not a scratchy yarn. I mean, I have a couple of sweaters I've knit out of this yarn. It's Hampton Fiber Mills New England sweater yarn. I don't think it's very scratchy at all. So if she complains, I might keep it. So when I try, it does have some negative ease through the waist, or zero ease, or maybe a little bit of negative ease. But it would be this so cute as a cropped sweater with a dress or a skirt or something like that. I kind of hope she doesn't want it. Anyway, so that's where I'm at. And then the sleeves, I'm pretty sure she wants long sleeves for this. There's a chance that they might be more, you know, middle of the arm. We'll see what she says. But so yeah, almost finished. And then the back, you can, it kind of, the way it sits, the back is a few inches longer than the front, so it'll have a nice hemline. All right. So the next thing, I've been playing with getting cashmere yarn for the shop, and I have a couple of different suppliers that I get my bare or naked yarn from, but I hadn't tried anybody's cashmere yet, so I ordered some sample skeins, and I thought, well, I need to dye it up and see how I like it. And I have been itching to try speckledy yarns. I haven't really done that. I've only done my self-striping yarns, and those are basically tonals or semi-solids. So I decided to try speckling, and yeah, it came out okay. You want to see? So I don't really, this would not be a skein on it. I was very nervous about it. I hate waste, but I needed practice. And so this was a one-off skein of sample yarn that I had gotten. And I thought, just let yourself play and don't get so caught up in it being perfect the first time out. Because don't we love to be perfectionists? I do. Anyway, so I gave myself permission. I just picked a couple of colors off the shelf. I didn't worry about too much with the planning. Mostly I just wanted to get the feel of it. So here it is skeined up. It's got some red and blue and green and orange. And I decided to cast on a new pattern that I saw called Love Bug Mittens. And it's a fingerless cabled mitten. So here's that. I started this yesterday, day before yesterday. It looks tiny to me. So here's my hand. Right? They'll probably end up going to my daughter. I don't know that I'll wear them, but I mean, I can get it on my wrist, and there are increases, but she'll probably get them. But I love the base, so we'll see about adding that to the shop sometime soon. And my last work in progress is a hat, a sock head hat. Also using Woolens and Nosh yarn. I wanted to show a self-striping hat. So this is Ashenvale. It's a 4-striper with a taupey and gradient kind of down to a dark purple. It kind of goes more like that. And this is my Lurex base. So it's got some sparkle, lots of sparkle in it. And I cast on 144 stitches, and instead of doing 2x2 rib, I am doing a 1x1 twisted rib, which later I thought about it and I was like, that might not have been too smart, because if you roll it up, you know, you put the hat on and you roll it up, it's just going to look like regular 1x1 ribbing and you won't see the twisted. But then I thought, maybe I won't roll it up, I'll just wear it without a cuff. But I like the rhythm of 1x1 twisted rib. Something about that to me just flows, you know, knitting through the back loop and then purling and knitting through the back. It just, I get into a really good rhythm, so that's what I felt like doing. Anyway, here's the yarn caked. Lots of purples. This week I've discovered I'm quite the purple person. I have a couple purple sweaters that I've made for myself. You'll see in finished objects, I made myself some purple slippers. I seem to like purple. I've never been able to answer the question, what's your favorite color? But maybe it's my favorite color. We'll see. So I think that's all my works in progress. And now on to finished objects. Let me take them off my feet. I finished my knitted slippers. They're felted. Last week I just had the one knit up, and then I finished the second and I felted them. I put leather bottoms on the bottom, and I wore them in the dye studio yesterday. My dye studio is in the basement. We have a finished basement, and the laundry room is very big. So I've set up a table and shelving and everything that I need down there for the studio. And I was dyeing yesterday, and I wore my slippers, and apparently I was being a little sloppy because I walked all over dye on my leather bottoms. But okay, I could always flip them over, I guess. I could take them off and flip them over if they got really nasty, but anyway, the pattern is Men's Loafer Slippers Felted by Monique Ray. I used Wool of the Andes from Knit Picks and felted them. I don't have a high efficiency washing machine. I have the one that came with the house when we bought it, and it's old school, which is great for felting though. So hot soapy water, a couple pairs of jeans, put them in. I think it took about 20 minutes or so. And after about 15 minutes, I would take, 10 minutes, I checked them, and I checked them every 3 to 5 minutes after that to see how much they had shrunk until they got to my foot size. And they're very light and they're very cozy. I was standing in my mudroom with a friend, and it was 20 degrees out or something, and our mudroom's not heated, of course, and all I had on were these slippers, and I did not feel that cold floor at all. It was really nice. And then my other finished out, or what I'm wearing, is my Felix cardigan. It's another Knit Picks yarn. I got the Simply Wool Bulky in the Winnie colorway. And you're like, wait, Michelle, that's not Winnie. And I'm like, I know, because I dyed it after I got it. It was just brown. I expected it to be brown, but it was really brown, like just a tan kind of color when I got it. So I decided to dye it. And I've got little yew tree buttons that I got at the Vermont Sheep and Wool Festival. And yeah, it's great. I would definitely make another, but this yarn is holding up okay. I wasn't planning on this sweater. And I didn't have any stash bulky weight, and nothing really worked to hold together to make a bulky weight that I had in stash. So I decided to order some from Knit Picks. I think I spent less than $40 on this yarn. And then I dyed it, and it looks great. I did do the sewn hem. And on the collar. Basically, I didn't make any modifications to the pattern, and I did go up a couple needle sizes because I'm a tight knitter, especially on wood or metal needles. So, but other than that, very great instructions, pretty quick knit. I cast on for this like 10 days before Rhinebeck thinking, oh, I'm going to get this sweater done in time to wear to Rhinebeck. Well, I cast off the body the night that I was staying over in Rhinebeck, and I didn't have sleeves. So no, I didn't finish it, but I did get a lot done in about a week or so of knitting, and now I've got it now. So it was my halvesy, almost done sweater for Rhinebeck this year. Okay, anything else? Nope, that's all I've got finished this week for you. So what I've been reading, I have been reading The Fifth Season by Miss Jemison. Yeah, Jemison. I'm about a little more than halfway done. It's a fun book. And then what I've been watching is just Downton Abbey. I love it. Okay, and then my last thing to talk about today, I'm doing good on time, is dream knitting and shop update stuff. So fading is super huge. Still, that's been going on for a couple of years now in the pattern world, right? And then mohair is coming along, and I thought, maybe what I could do, this new pattern came out, Sorrel. Have you seen it? And it's a faded mohair fingering weight sweater. So that came out. The Paloma by Espastrico, a free pattern, came out, which is also a fingering weight and mohair sweater. And it's pretty plain. It's boxy with a mock turtleneck and sleeves that don't have any decreases. So they're nice, roomy sleeves. And then there's the Love Note, of course, that everybody's so smitten with right now. And I thought maybe it would be easier to get a fade look and just have one color of yarn, but then have your mohair gradiate. Gradiate? Is that a word? Anyway, so I thought I think I'll give that a try. I want to try dyeing mohair and see how that goes, and I want to try speckles. So I just decided to dye up a sweater's quantity of fingering weight yarn on my Targhee base. I'm really leaning towards doing the Paloma. But the sorrel yoke is so darn pretty. I haven't actually made a decision yet. But so I decided to do the gradient in purples because apparently that's my favorite color now. Let me see if I can hold it. So here's my first set. So it's got a warm gray, taupey color, putty color, and then the purple is down to a really deep inky purple. I started off with these four, but then as I was looking at the yardage requirements, I was going to need more, so I decided to dye a fifth and kind of smooth out that last color transition. And I think it's going to be pretty. Yeah, so I'm excited about those. And then also, I dyed the Targhee. And it's got that same sort of warm brown base. And then I've layered in some mauve and then given it some raspberry and dark brown speckles. So I think this is going to be light enough to show through and complement the fade, and give it some interest underneath, but not be so dark that I think it's going to go well. I think that mauvey pink is going to go really well with the purples, with the dark brown speckles. Yeah, so, but this was my project for this week. Next week, I plan on getting my self-striping back on the go with a couple of new colors for that. But I felt like this is what, I had fear, you guys. I had fear of the unknown, fear of waste, fear of not making it what I hoped it would be, and like the way I see it in my head. And I really was procrastinating and feeling bad about myself. And so I just kind of got decided, you're going down there and you're doing it, and you're just not going to worry about it. If it messes up, nobody needs to know about it. It's okay. But I think I'm going to be really happy with what I've got so far. So that's mostly just an opportunity for me to let you know that I'm scared too. You might be scared, but don't let it hold you back from trying something new. You always learn something. You get better. It's valuable to get outside of your comfort zone, right? All right, so I think that's me. Again, show notes and recipe links are down below. And I will also link on my website. I don't think I figured that out yet, but and I still need to figure out the Ravelry group. I'm going to get that together, and I will announce that when it's up and running. But I hope you guys enjoy your baking, snuggle up and get some knitting going, and I will talk to you in a couple of weeks. Have a good one.